The first file was discovered in a mislabeled box inside the basement archive of an abandoned Department of Energy facility outside of Alamogordo, New Mexico. The box contained no identifying markings aside from a brittle yellow sticker that read simply, Project Mercury 6, C, Folder 3. It had been forgotten for decades, shoved behind stacks of water-damaged filing cabinets and radioactive materials logs from the 1950s. There were no digital records of the project, nothing in the National Archives, nothing in the FOIA database, no trace on government inventory. It was as though the program had never existed, and yet, inside that file, there were pages, typewritten reports, blurred photographs, transcribed audio logs, 3 names, redacted in thick black ink, yet still partially legible when held to light. The dates matched exactly with an entry in a now declassified Department of Defense ledger from 1965. 3 civilian test subjects signed into a sleep research center in northern Nevada. They were never signed out. The official story doesn't mention them. Not once. The facility, codenamed Station 8, was supposedly used for high-altitude fatigue testing during the height of the space race. But the documents in Folder 3 suggest something far stranger. A separate initiative. Not NASA, not the Air Force, but an interagency unit with no clear origin. The stamps on the memos varied. Some bore the seal of the Army Medical Research Institute. Others simply said Langley. At the center of it all, a sleep experiment with no clear purpose, no published results, and no surviving staff. The 3 test subjects, each between the ages of 24 and 31, were brought in during the 3rd week of August, 1965. They were referred to in shorthand as Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. No last names, no hometown. They had all passed preliminary psych evals. No criminal records, no history of mental illness. They signed non-disclosure agreements. They were told it would last 7 days. There are photographs of the facility's exterior, grainy and discolored. It looked more like a bomb shelter than a lab, a windowless bunker set into the base of a granite ridge some 30 miles from the nearest paved road. One of the photos shows an out-of-place metal tower nearby, strung with cables, with what looks like a radar dish pointed not at the sky, but at the ground. No explanation is given. Inside the transcripts, there's something even more disturbing. Beginning on day 3, the test subjects stopped speaking in full sentences. The medical log notes linguistic degradation inconsistent with known sleep deprivation responses. The technicians' notes grow increasingly frantic. By day 5, all 3 subjects had become unresponsive, though their vital signs remained stable. The cameras caught them staring at the far wall for hours, eyes open, unblinking, mouths slightly agape. The final footage ends in static. There is a final memo, dated 2 days after the subjects had been officially declared comatose. It's addressed to someone referred to only as Director R. The last line reads, "Recommend immediate termination of program. Ambient anomalies have exceeded projection thresholds. We are no longer confident the subjects are alone." No other explanation, no follow-up reports, just an authorization slip, operation shutdown, time-stamped 3 hours later. The facility was sealed, the power was cut, the subjects were never removed. To this day, no one has been able to find Station 8 again. Satellite imagery shows only brushland and rock, no structures, no roads. But local ranger logs from the 1970s mention something strange. Hikers reporting machine hums beneath the ground. Some say they heard voices echoing from the cliffs at night, voices that didn't speak in any recognizable language. Whatever happened in that bunker in the summer of 1965, it wasn't just about sleep. And that file, the one that shouldn't have existed, is just the beginning. In September 1965, 2 weeks after the shutdown order, an anonymous letter was postmarked from Carson City, Nevada, addressed to the editor of the Reno Gazette. It never made it to publication. The envelope was intercepted and archived under Department of Internal Security case file 11B4091, marked confidential. The letter was handwritten in uneven strokes, seemingly under duress, and signed only with the initials Lel W. The contents of the letter described a research site in the Granite Hills region that had been hastily evacuated after equipment started recording signal spikes during dreamless states. The writer claimed to be one of the contractors hired to monitor EMF fluctuations as part of a broader neurological study. According to the letter, the readings didn't just spike, they formed patterns, pulses that lined up with magnetic anomalies already mapped by the Geological Survey. The letter ends abruptly, mid-sentence, with the final legible words reading, "They're not asleep, they're listening." A few weeks later, a freelance geophysicist named Roland Carver was found dead in his trailer just outside of Fallon. He had previously published a paper on subaural frequencies and their potential effects on the human brain. His final voicemail, retrieved from a deteriorating magnetic reel, included a cryptic message left for his colleague. "They're below the thresholds, yes, but they're synchronized. The pulse isn't random, it's rhythmic, like a breath or a language." No foul play was recorded. Cause of death was ruled an overdose, though no substances were found in his system. His notes were seized by military personnel the next day under jurisdictional authority not disclosed to the coroner's office. The trail gets stranger from there. In 1966, a Soviet defector arrived in Stockholm carrying a sealed envelope marked Morozov Theory, Do Not Translate. The file was handed off to British intelligence and quietly suppressed. Years later, a partial translation was uncovered through an internal leak from MI6. The document, written in Russian, described a theory that certain patterns of uninterrupted unconsciousness could allow the brain to become a receiver, not for dreams, but for signals embedded in the background noise of the universe itself. The defector had included sketches, crude diagrams of geometric structures found in dream states, drawn identically by multiple subjects with no contact between them. When overlaid with star charts, the shapes corresponded to gravitational anomalies detected near the Kuiper belt. The Soviet project, codenamed Zvezda Spitania, was discontinued without explanation. The lead researchers were relocated, some disappeared. Meanwhile, back in the US, the original recordings from Station 8 had been transferred to a classified cold storage vault near Mount Weather. A brief internal report from 1971 states the audio contains low-band speech patterns not consistent with any known terrestrial phonetic system. Attempts to replicate the phenomena failed. But one analyst, working independently in 1974, noticed something that had been overlooked. Every time the signals spiked in the recordings, every time the unresponsive subjects twitched or opened their mouths, the EMF meters surged exactly 11.3 seconds after. Always the same delay, always the same pitch, 57.6 Hz. That number would appear again in 1980 in an unrelated investigation of seismic tremors in Northern California. Buried inside a geological anomaly report was a line that read, "Unexplained harmonic vibration, suspected interference, matching signature, 57.6 Hz. The location of the anomaly? Just 14 miles from the last known coordinates of Station 8. These fragments, a dead geophysicist, a redacted Soviet theory, a repeating frequency, weren't part of any unified report. They existed in isolation, scattered through disconnected files and forgotten memos. But when pieced together, they form a rough outline, not of what the project was, but of what it might have exposed. And it all leads back to three subjects who were never officially declared dead, only unresponsive, and still, somehow, emitting brainwaves. In early 1982, a classified memorandum circulated within the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, marked for internal review only. It referenced a newly uncovered archive of analog tapes labeled Delta Phase and noted their connection to a project long presumed terminated. The tapes had been mistakenly stored in a mislabeled crate of Vietnam War field recordings found during an internal audit. No return address, no tracking, just the designation, recovered from Site Echo 8. The tapes were immediately rerouted to a secure acoustic analysis lab in Fort Belvoir, Virginia. The recordings were distorted, Hums, pulses, static. But layered within the noise were recurring patterns, too ordered to be random. Analysts isolated sequences that repeated at mathematically precise intervals, unaffected by environmental noise. Spectrographic analysis revealed tonal shifts matching human vocal frequency, yet none of the recordings contained actual speech. Instead, the tonal clusters formed waveforms consistent with deep REM neural oscillations. In simple terms, the recordings mimic the electrical rhythms of sleeping human brains. This alone was unsettling, but it was what came next that unsettled even hardened intelligence officers. At exactly 3 minutes and 12 seconds into one tape, there was a sharp spike, a crackle. Then, a voice, faint, almost mechanical, whispering a phrase in broken English. "We are where you left us." The voice was not attributed to any known speaker. It was not a subject, not a technician, not a researcher. The lab director requested an immediate pause to further analysis. 3 analysts reportedly left the room during playback and refused to return. No formal reason was given. Further metadata embedded in the tape's carrier signal indicated it had been recorded in late 1965, 3 months after Station 8 was officially shut down and sealed. This raised a question the agency could not explain. How was anything being recorded from a dead, powerless site? Internal speculation quickly turned toward residual environmental interference or a hoax, but the timestamps on the data log proved authentic. In a desperate attempt to verify the signal's origin, a recon drone was deployed to the Granite Hills area in January 1983. The drone crashed within 90 minutes of arrival. No mechanical error was logged. Its final telemetry simply stopped mid-transmission. When a secondary drone was sent in 2 days later, it returned, intact, but with all onboard footage corrupted. Yet strangely, its audio system recorded a low hum for the entire duration of the flight. Frequency: 57.6 Hz. Around the same time, whispers began to spread in internal security briefing. Personnel from unrelated installations started reporting unusual dreams, shared dreams. Not dreams with similar themes, but identical sequences. The same hallway, the same door at the end, always locked. One logistics officer described hearing knocking from the other side of the door. Another, stationed across the country, reported the exact same number of knocks. 3, then 5, then silence. The phenomenon was dismissed by official psychologists as mass suggestion, a known cognitive feedback effect under stress. But the files show increasing concern from senior staff. One footnote in a black-folded report reads, in careful type, "Door, granite, left, no key, no entry, still knocking." The term neuroresonance leakage was coined internally to describe what they feared was happening. The possibility that the minds of the original test subjects hadn't just decayed in isolation, but had bled into a sort of ambient informational state, influencing others remotely. The phrase residual cognitive field appears in multiple pages, always accompanied by the same instruction: do not pursue. Despite this, one researcher did pursue it. Dr. Arthur Kell, a theoretical neurologist who had worked on early dream mapping algorithms in the 1960s, requested access to the sleep EEGs from Station 8. He was denied, but Kell wasn't new to being shut out. He went rogue in spring 1984, launching an unsanctioned test on himself using a modified neural feedback loop. He documented everything in a private journal, later found among his possessions after his death that autumn. The journal entries become increasingly erratic. He reports seeing the 3 test subjects in his dreams, watching him. He never saw their faces, only the backs of their heads, and heard a persistent hum growing louder with each night. The final entry, scrawled in shaky pen, "I finally saw them. They've turned around." Kell died of a cerebral hemorrhage during sleep. The coroner's report noted an unusual post-mortem detail. Despite being dead for hours, his pupils were dilated, and his jaw was tightly clenched, locked in what appeared to be a silent scream. The agency took his journals. His apartment was emptied within a day. The questions that remained were no longer scientific. They were ontological. Was consciousness a closed system? Could dreams be breached, not from within, but from something outside? Had the Sleep Project in 1965 opened a one-way door? The evidence wasn't conclusive, but it wasn't absent either, and more than one analyst began to suspect that the project hadn't just gone dark, it had gone deeper. By the late 1980s, most traces of the 1965 Sleep Project had been buried under layers of bureaucracy, intentionally scattered across departments and reclassified under unrelated projects. Yet one name kept resurfacing in the most obscure corners of the archive: Project Ithaca. Unlike the original Station 8 operation, Ithaca didn't involve test subjects, labs, or EEG machines. Its records were almost entirely theoretical. A collection of probability models, deep brainwave simulations, and artificial sleep state experiments run on early prototype supercomputers, namely the Cray-1 housed at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. The purpose of Project Ithaca was never officially declared, but a pattern emerged. The simulations all began with the same premise. What happens to the human mind in a prolonged, stimulus-free sleep state with no sensory input, no light, no time markers, and no interruption? Not coma, not rest, but wakeful, unbroken dormancy. The AI models ran scenarios where the mind eventually constructed its own reality, seeking contact, creating patterns. But the breakthrough, if it can be called that, came during a simulation run designated ITH-7-12. According to the system logs, the AI developed a closed-loop echo, a self-sustaining neural pattern that grew increasingly complex with each iteration. Then, inexplicably, it began emitting signals. Actual audio data, human-like voice fragments. None of the source code was programmed to produce speech, but analysts documented 3 phonemes. When stitched together, they resembled a phrase, "still awake." The research was halted immediately, not due to technical failure, but a recommendation by an internal oversight committee citing unauthorized recursive behavior within non-biological systems. In simple terms, the machine was dreaming, and it was dreaming about being trapped. That same month, a civilian technician in charge of system maintenance at Livermore filed a formal complaint. In it, he described a recurring sound coming from the Cray-1's cooling unit, a low vibration that didn't match the fan frequency. When recorded and analyzed, the vibration's pitch measured precisely 57.6 Hz. The lab dismissed the complaint. The technician resigned 2 weeks later and left no forwarding address. Shortly after, a graduate researcher working under a DARPA-funded neurocognition program at Stanford attempted to recreate the Ithaca data sequence using EEG data collected from unrelated sleep studies. His notes, recovered posthumously, reveal that he had selected 47 datasets at random, but 3 of them produced identical waveform anomalies, all clustered at the same timestamp: 4 hours, 44 minutes, and 12 seconds into deep sleep. The signals were sharp, consistent, and inexplicably identical. When cross-referenced with legacy files from the original 1965 project, those exact timestamps aligned with the final documented activity from Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie before they fell unresponsive. That was the moment the signal began. The anomalies didn't stop there. Starting in 1991, a series of unusual incidents occurred across 3 separate national parks: Lassen Volcanic in California, White Sands in New Mexico, and Great Basin in Nevada. Campers reported hearing a high-pitched tone at night, followed by extreme disorientation, nausea, and in several cases, total loss of short-term memory. In one instance, a forest ranger was found wandering in the dark, barefoot and incoherent, mumbling what sounded like coordinates. When those coordinates were plotted, they pointed to the original location of Station 8. That same year, a white paper circulated internally among senior security analysts. It carried no author. Its subject line read simply, "Dream-linked geoacoustic phenomena, preliminary evidence of persistence." It proposed that deep subterranean sound patterns might be carrying cognitive imprints, residual consciousness, from experiments involving extended dream states. The document was dismissed as speculative and shelved, but it ended with a single, troubling recommendation. Do not triangulate signal sources near original test sites. By the end of the decade, nearly everyone involved with Station 8 or Project Ithaca had either retired or disappeared from public records. A handful of researchers moved into obscure academic fields. One was found dead in a motel in Oregon, surrounded by tape recorders and printed star charts. Another reportedly took a vow of silence and lived the rest of her life in a monastery in northern Quebec. And then there's the tape, a single reel-to-reel magnetic tape anonymously mailed to a university radio station in Arizona in 1998. No return address, no message. The label on the box read, "Play only while asleep." The broadcast team, assuming it was a prank, played the tape on air during a 2 a.m. experimental sound segment. The recording was 22 minutes of low-frequency humming interspersed with fragments of static and whisper-like distortions. The following morning, the station received over 300 calls and emails from listeners reporting nightmares. Specific, shared details. A dark corridor, a ticking sound, a door without a handle. Several listeners claimed they woke up unable to move for nearly 2 minutes, experiencing a state of paralysis while hearing a low, mechanical voice repeating the same phrase. "We remember your breath." The station deleted the broadcast file within 24 hours and claimed the incident never occurred. But an audio technician copied the tape before deletion and uploaded a degraded version to an obscure file-sharing site under the name Delta Dream.wave. It still circulates in underground forums. Listeners report similar effects to this day. And still, no one knows what the original signal was, or if it ever truly ended. Some believe it wasn't a byproduct of the experiment. It was the objective. In the spring of 2003, a data recovery technician working at a retired NOAA satellite operations facility in Colorado uncovered a corrupted hard drive during a disposal audit. The drive, manufactured in 1996, bore no identifying tags beyond a serial number and the word Echo carved faintly into the casing with a knife or similar tool. When repaired, the drive contained a series of encrypted logs, not weather data, but time-stamped audio files recorded over an 8-month period in 1997. All were labeled with 3-letter codes: ALF, BRV, CHR. There were over 200 files, each precisely 10 minutes long, each beginning with a soft electronic tone, followed by silence, then a low rhythmic thumping, unmistakably human in cadence like a heartbeat. Analysts at the Naval Intelligence Acoustic Division reviewed the tapes after the technician, fearing legal trouble, anonymously mailed them to a contact in Washington. Their conclusion was quietly appended to an internal memo. Sound signatures are consistent with fetal ECG patterns, unlikely to be environmental artifacts, origin unknown. But it was the ambient signal layered under the heartbeat that caught attention. After spectral analysis, technicians identified faint vocal fragments buried deep within the recordings, repeating at irregular intervals. Most were unintelligible, but one sequence, repeated across multiple files, translated into a distorted string of syllables. Alpha, not asleep, alpha, still within. The memo was marked as an anomaly and forwarded to DARPA's Legacy Operations Desk. There, it disappeared into the same vault as the 1965 Station 8 files. That same year, in a seemingly unrelated case, 2 hikers in northern Nevada were found unconscious near an uncharted ravine west of the Granite Hills. No signs of trauma, no signs of struggle. When revived, both reported having had the same dream. They described a submerged corridor, walls pulsing with light, and a pressure in the ears like deep-sea descent. One of them added that they heard whispering, not in words, but in the rhythm of breath. Neither hiker had any known psychological history, but within 3 weeks, both had checked into separate psychiatric facilities after experiencing recurring sleep paralysis. The medical reports included strange EEG readings, persistent waveforms that matched almost exactly the archived neural patterns from the original alpha subject in 1965. No one at the hospital had access to those archives. Officially, they didn't exist. In 2006, a fire broke out in the sub-basement archives of the National Biomedical Research Center in Bethesda. Most records were destroyed, but before the blaze, a grad student doing archival work had made photocopies of an older internal memo she'd found fascinating, something she thought would make for an eerie blog post. She never wrote the post. Her roommate found her sitting upright in bed 3 nights later, catatonic, eyes open, clutching the papers in her lap. The memo detailed a failed attempt to interface with a patient in a prolonged, non-responsive sleep state using auditory feedback. The patient, unnamed, only referred to as C3, had been in that state for over 40 years. Brain activity was minimal but constant. An experimental program was designed to send auditory stimuli via bone conduction headphones. At precisely 04:44 a.m. on the third day of testing, the EEG patterns spiked. C3 opened his mouth, though he did not speak, and the headphones played back something no one expected. They played back the word "here," nothing more. The playback system was analog and not capable of recording input, yet the waveform was present. The doctors dismissed it as a glitch. The memo writer did not agree. "I've watched the footage," the author wrote. "C3 didn't respond to our stimulus. We responded to his." That same phrase appears years later in a confidential NSA briefing titled "Cognitive Residue and Subconscious Cross-Traffic: Implications for Passive Dream Surveillance." The briefing, heavily redacted, refers to a category of unexplained long-range dream synchronizations observed during satellite telemetry downtimes. Certain clusters of individuals, often separated by thousands of miles, reported identical sleep imagery during radio blackouts. One detail reappeared consistently: a low room, featureless, with walls that breathed. Sometimes there was a humming sound. Sometimes the witnesses claimed they could hear their own name, whispered in a voice that didn't belong to them. The phenomenon was labeled echo-temporal feedback events, unofficially sleeper bleed. All documentation was classified Level 7 and suppressed, but the terminology leaked to private researchers, many of whom had already begun encountering similar anomalies in sleep studies, lucid dream experiments, and sensory isolation tanks. A few brave or foolish independent labs tried to recreate the environment described in the old files. Total darkness, fixed low-frequency exposure, temporal isolation, and artificial dream cycle induction. The results were inconsistent but disturbing. One subject emerged from the tank after 46 hours of testing. He refused to speak for days. When he finally did, all he said was, "There's a hallway behind the wall. You just have to stop pretending it isn't there." The research was abandoned. Most of the participants suffered sleep disorders for months afterward. One was found sitting on the roof of his apartment building at dawn, staring at the eastern horizon, repeating the phrase, "They never left." These isolated cases, a heartbeat on an audio file, whispers from a man who hadn't spoken in decades, dreams shared across continents, are more than coincidences. They suggest a lattice of residual awareness, still pulsing beneath the surface of our waking world, tethered to an origin point long buried and long ignored. But the signal keeps finding its way through, in power lines, in static, in dreams. And somewhere, deep beneath layers of time, stone, and forgotten experiments, 3 minds remain, unmoving, unaging, still connected to something we were never supposed to understand. In 2009, a senior archivist at the Library of Congress filed an incident report after discovering several mislabeled microfilm reels during a routine digital conversion project. These reels, originally believed to contain World War II logistics documentation, were instead filled with unusual broadcast transcripts. The logs were dated June through September 1965 and bore the call sign WBR-8, a designation not registered with the FCC or any known military communications unit. The broadcast station listed was supposedly located in Washoe County, Nevada, but no such facility ever existed on record. The broadcasts weren't public radio shows. They consisted of looping atmospheric tones and fragmented vocal sequences interspersed with seemingly random bursts of numbers, some of which resembled coordinates. Analysts who reviewed the reels found that these broadcasts appeared to follow a specific schedule, once every 88 minutes, mimicking the orbit of a satellite. One log entry stood out. It described a vocal sequence that repeated 4 times before ceasing entirely. The words, deciphered through noise reduction software, were delivered in a calm, monotonous voice. "Alpha to Control, I have not been dismissed." This was followed by 15 seconds of silence. Then, "Repeat, we are still transmitting." The archivist who discovered the reels was transferred 6 weeks later and never publicly spoke of the find. But someone made digital copies of the audio files. One surfaced on an amateur numbers station enthusiast forum in late 2010 under the thread title "Ghost Sat from 1965. The post was quickly removed, but before deletion, several users had downloaded the file and reported similar reactions: nausea, insomnia, and most disturbingly, recurring dreams involving an underground structure filled with water, humming, and a single, red, blinking light in the distance. The blinking frequency, as noted by one user, was approximately 57.6 times per minute. Not long after, a linguistics professor at Columbia University published an anonymous paper in an obscure journal under the pseudonym V.G. Hale. The paper, titled "A Phonetic Model of Sleep State Articulations," proposed a theory that recurring dream elements across populations could be viewed as a shared unconscious vocabulary, fragments of words never spoken but somehow remembered. The paper cross-referenced transcribed reports from patients suffering from chronic parasomnia with declassified Soviet and American sleep experiments. Hale's conclusion was chilling. The structure of these articulations is non-linear, recursive, and mimetic of language acquisition patterns, but without exposure. The data suggests language seeded not through learning, but through ambient absorption. In a footnote, Hale referenced 3 known sleep study outliers, individuals who had reportedly never emerged from controlled dormancy, listed only as A, B, and C. No explanation of their origin was given. But the footnote noted that audio transcriptions from these subjects showed linguistic overlap with entirely unrelated patients decades later in different countries, with no shared background or influence. That same year, an FOIA request filed by a freelance journalist into missing DoD experimental funding from the 1960s yielded a surprise: a heavily redacted summary of something called Echo Deep. The summary was vague but mentioned persistent theta range emissions and non-responsive cognitive environments consistent with semi-autonomous residual fields. No project leader was named, no conclusions were drawn, but in the list of impacted regions, 3 sites were marked with asterisks. One of them, Granite Hills, NV. Shortly thereafter, seismic monitors in the region began detecting low-frequency tremors, shallow, rhythmic, and unconnected to any tectonic movement. The intervals were precise: 3 pulses, then a pause, then 5. The sequence mirrored one described in a decades-old dream report taken from a woman institutionalized in 1966 after reporting the knocking behind her dreams. Geologists dismissed the tremors as minor subsurface disturbances, but a technician leaked an internal graph from the monitoring equipment showing the pulses overlaid with a ghosted waveform, the same one generated by the audio tapes recovered from the 1980s cold vault. A match. It was as if something beneath Granite Hills had been waiting, and now was answering. In 2011, a private team of spelunkers equipped with unauthorized GPR, ground-penetrating radar, explored an off-limits sector of federal land under the pretense of mapping undiscovered caves. What they found instead was a sealed chamber, reinforced with decades-old concrete and lined with rusted cables leading into bedrock. At its center, a metal hatch, long corroded, bearing no handle. Around it were signs of movement, scrapes, shifts in soil, as if it had opened, not from above, but from below. The team never submitted their findings publicly, But one of the members uploaded a photo to a hidden subreddit weeks later, showing the hatch surrounded by disturbed gravel. The caption simply read, "The ground breathes here." It was removed in under an hour. Attempts to identify the team failed. All known members disconnected from public profiles. 2 had their bank accounts frozen by federal order for unrelated investigations. A third was later found in a hospital in Arizona, suffering from acute sensory dissociation. He refused to sleep, repeatedly muttered the phrase, "We were never alone in the room." Meanwhile, civilian reports across Nevada increased. Phantom vibrations at night, synchronized dreams, inexplicable power outages lasting precisely 11 seconds. Hospitals recorded patients waking up at exactly 4:44 a.m. in a panic, claiming they'd heard someone whisper their name from beneath the bed or floor. The same whispered names repeated across different towns, different victims: Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. No one had ever released those code names publicly. The web of coincidence stretched too far, too precise, too deliberate. And through it all, the signal remained. Not blaring, not screaming, but pulsing just beneath the world's noise floor. Lingering in the hum of fans, the hiss of radios, the moment just before you fall asleep and your ears start to ring. They are still broadcasting, and now more people than ever are beginning to hear them. In 2014, a classified Department of Energy briefing was leaked briefly onto a secure server used by subcontracted defense consultants. The document, titled Persistent Low-Frequency Signal Clusters, Non-Geologic Source Candidates, was quickly pulled offline, but not before a cybersecurity analyst downloaded it during routine packet monitoring. The briefing was not marked top secret, perhaps intentionally, but its contents pointed unmistakably to operations buried beneath half a century of silence. The most shocking portion was a page marked with a red watermark: Echo Persistence Hypothesis, Human Origin Resonant Patterns. The page contained a line graph mapping pulse intervals recorded between 1965 and 2013 across various installations, including those not known to the public, such as Facility 9B, unverified location, and a decommissioned NORAD listening post deep beneath the Wichita Mountains. Each facility had recorded the same anomalous pulse at least once: 3 short bursts, 5 long, 1 flatline, each at 57.6 Hz, each at 4:44 a.m. The briefing didn't draw conclusions, but one line stood alone at the bottom of the page, underscored and highlighted. Signal exhibits biological signature decay patterns consistent with aged neural activity. Decaying, but not dead. Someone in government believed the signal was a consciousness. That same year, a researcher affiliated with a private sleep institute in Helsinki published a meta-analysis of dream paralysis cases collected over the last 20 years. While the paper was largely ignored by mainstream academia, it contained a statistical anomaly that caught the eye of independent neurolinguists. A disproportionate number of patients from unrelated countries had reported hearing a voice during paralysis events. Not voices, a single voice. Male, flat in tone, always behind them. In 78% of these cases, patients reported the same phrase: "Why did you turn off the lights?" Even more troubling, phonetic analysis of voice recordings taken during some of the events, usually involuntary moans or utterances captured during sleep lab sessions, revealed shared cadence markers with the voice from the 1983 Cold Vault tapes. Specifically, a stretch of waveforms known to match Subject Alpha's final vocal activity before Station 8 was sealed. The possibility began to emerge that the signal was not simply transmitting, it was interacting. In 2016, a Swedish expedition team conducting magnetometric surveys near the Baltic Sea stumbled upon a submerged structure approximately 60 meters beneath the surface. The object, dubbed informally by the media as the Baltic Anomaly, sparked short-lived international attention, mostly written off as a glacial rock formation. But internally, several analysts flagged a detail not shared with the public. The structure emitted a constant EM frequency at 57.6 Hz. Within 2 months, any investigation into the anomaly ceased. Equipment was removed. The official story changed. But an internal NATO signal report, obtained through unofficial channels, stated plainly that the frequency appeared to mirror known Cold War-era sleep-state resonance anomalies, with a signature most consistent with the unidentified origin broadcasts logged under the Echo Deep project. In other words, the Baltic object was repeating the same brainwave signature recorded from the unresponsive subjects in 1965. Meanwhile, closer to home, a former CIA analyst turned whistleblower posted a series of encrypted notes on a darknet forum, claiming to have reviewed non-linear consciousness event logs during his final years at Langley. The most damning of his statements was simple. They made contact, not with another world, but with a part of ourselves we don't access when we're awake. He referred to it as the chambered zone, a hypothetical space of internal, dormant awareness where consciousness recedes but doesn't vanish, where it waits. His final message: they opened it. They left the door ajar, and now it's whispering back. The account vanished the next day. Corroboration came unexpectedly through a declassified Soviet-era project summary from 1972 that had long been considered fabrication. Operation Camerton. The project involved extended anechoic chamber tests on deep sleep volunteers. After 96 hours, subjects began exhibiting low-register vocalizations that matched the phonetic range of Russian whispers in reverse. One of the researchers, in a panicked memo, stated, "We are not hearing them dream. We are hearing what is dreaming through them." For decades, the Camerton files were ignored. Now they were resurfacing in context. As the frequency patterns spread, more modern forms of technology began picking it up. In 2018, a software engineer experimenting with AI sonification algorithms fed live radio static into a neural network for training purposes. After 36 hours, the algorithm began reproducing the static in recognizable linguistic rhythms, not words, but syllables spaced in consistent, human-like tempo. When slowed down and pitch normalized, the engineer was able to isolate a phrase stitched through 3 separate hours of output. "You left us inside." There had been no vocal data fed into the model, no training on language or speech synthesis. The only input was open-band shortwave noise collected from a defunct radio tower in Nevada. The realization came slowly, and then all at once. The 1965 project might not have created the signal. It may have simply been the first to hear it. And by recording it, by studying it, by amplifying and bouncing it through wires and sleep labs and steel corridors underground, they had inadvertently fed it, given it structure, resonance, echo. Now it was mimicking. Now it was multiplying. And now, in every part of the world, in forums, in hospital logs, in dream journals and corrupted audio files, the same signal was surfacing in new ways. The whisper was not fading. It was evolving. In 2019, a cluster of civilian reports began surfacing from across the Midwest, mostly dismissed as online hoaxes or sleep paralysis anecdotes, until the pattern became too precise to ignore. Dozens of unrelated individuals described nearly identical dreams over the course of 2 months. In each dream, they were led through a featureless hallway by unseen guides. The hallway, always curved to the left, was dimly lit by an unseen source and lined with narrow, soundless doors. Behind one of those doors, they reported hearing a voice, not shouting, whispering, calm, patient, waiting. Most couldn't remember what it said, but a few did. They remembered a phrase that hadn't been spoken aloud in over 50 years. "We're still beneath." Word of the phenomenon reached an independent researcher, Dr. Melinda Rowe, who had previously worked on auditory hallucination modeling at MIT. She collected testimonies, ran phonetic comparisons, and discovered something she couldn't explain. The voice in these dreams wasn't just similar across subjects. It was identical. Same tone, same inflection, same pacing, as though the voice wasn't being imagined, but received. She went further. Rowe compared the vocal profile to archival data gathered from a defunct research program she once briefly consulted on, a program that had access to the 1965 Station 8 recordings. The match, 98.4% similarity to Subject Bravo. When she attempted to publish her findings, her university department revoked her credentials. The official reason, unethical data sourcing. But those close to her claimed she'd never broken protocol. She'd just gone too far. She vanished a few weeks later. The last post from her encrypted academic forum account simply read, "It's not in our heads, it's under them." Meanwhile, reports escalated. A teenager in Iowa was hospitalized for a sleep episode that lasted 36 hours. Upon waking, he described seeing a man with no eyes, just deep vibrating hums where his face should be. He drew a sketch for a nurse. The image matched a hallucination drawn in 1973 by a technician present at Station 8's shutdown, a sketch never released to the public. In early 2020, a deep-sea fiber cable maintenance team operating off the coast of Greenland logged an unexplained signal interrupting their telemetry stream. The signal, low and rhythmic, contained non-random oscillations at precisely 57.6 Hz. Initially assumed to be marine interference or undersea tectonic activity, the noise was logged and archived. 2 days later, a technician running background spectrogram analysis flagged something hidden in the signal. A sequence of tones that, when converted from binary frequency intervals into ASCII characters, spelled the word awake. This wasn't geological. This wasn't natural. In response, an unacknowledged division of Homeland Security issued a silent directive to monitor anomalous electromagnetic activity across all government communication infrastructure. The directive included specific thresholds, 57.6 Hz, within atmospheric bandwidths, low-noise channel intrusion, and GPS drift variance during synchronized sleep cycles. They called it Protocol Omega, Subconscious Signal Event Containment. No such protocol has ever been acknowledged publicly. That same year, a dormant sensor in the Nevada desert reactivated after decades of silence. It belonged to a decommissioned Cold War-era surveillance grid, originally meant to detect Soviet missile launches through infrared tremor patterns. No one remembered it was still active. Its transmission contained one line of data: echo integrity restored. When technicians traced the signal back, they found the sensor had received a low-frequency input that pulsed once per hour for 7 consecutive days before going silent. It wasn't a malfunction. It was deliberate, and the pulses matched known intervals of REM sleep in human subjects. Worse still, the final pulse occurred at 4:44 a.m. local time. Private security camera footage from a nearby ranger station that night caught something else. A single fluorescent light flickering in sync with each pulse. No power disruption was recorded. That footage has never been released. Across social media and anonymous message boards, a phrase began to appear in unexpected places. Graffiti, unsigned emails, corrupted PDF metadata, forum posts with no visible authorship. We're remembering together. It became a kind of underground mantra among those tracking the pattern, but others noticed something more troubling. The phrase began to show up in private files, not shared documents, local-only notes, typed and saved, but never written by the user. In these cases, metadata showed no keyboard activity, no edit history, as if the phrase had always been there, waiting. Simultaneously, psychiatric facilities across several states began reporting cases of mirror insomnia, a condition in which patients remained fully alert but believed they were asleep, convinced they were inside a dream they couldn't leave. These patients would respond to questions with vague, unrelated phrases. "It's brighter below." "I am not the only one in here." "They're watching through the seams." EEG readings from these individuals revealed patterns that echoed the original sleep study scans of 1965. Not similar, identical, down to the noise artifacts caused by the recording equipment of that era, which should have been impossible to replicate. These weren't coincidences. They were bleed-throughs. Something long buried was returning, not as a burst, not as a revelation, but as a slow, deliberate reclamation of space. Not physical space, but cognitive, emotional, sleep-based. And it wasn't doing it through force. It was doing it through familiarity. The signal didn't need to invade our minds. It needed to remind them. In the early months of 2021, an anonymous cache of documents surfaced on a secure drop site used by whistleblowers in the intelligence community. The upload was brief, lasting only 48 minutes before vanishing. But during that window, enough users mirrored the contents to preserve them. The files bore no metadata, no origin stamp, no encryption. They were simply labeled REM Recall. Contained within were hundreds of pages, transcripts, audio spectrograms, dream logs, deep sleep EEGs, and redacted interagency memos. Most dated back to the late 1960s through the early 2000s, but a handful carried recent timestamps, less than 6 months old. The signature pattern was unmistakable. All of it revolved around the signal. Buried in the chaos was a series of classified briefings attributed to a disbanded defense agency once tasked with neurocognitive warfare analysis. According to these reports, by mid-2020, the 57.6 Hz signature had been detected in over 39 global locations, not as broad atmospheric drift, but as narrowband emissions occurring during known human sleep hours. This wasn't random interference. It was targeted. A pattern timed to the unconscious rhythms of an entire species. The most disturbing of these files was a memo titled Neural Pattern Recurrence in Artificial Sleep Environments. It described tests performed on coma patients kept under induced states in isolated, shielded hospital rooms. No electronic devices, no windows, no external stimuli. Within 72 hours of sustained unconsciousness, every single patient began generating neural oscillations matching the signature first documented in Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. No outside influence, no known contamination. As the memo stated, plainly, the signal is not entering from without, it is being remembered from within. What had begun in 1965 as a localized anomaly was now understood as something much more invasive, a cognitive waveform potentially dormant in all human minds, waiting for ideal environmental conditions to awaken. Theories emerged in rapid succession. Some believed the 1965 project had accidentally tuned into a deep biological constant, the mental equivalent of a carrier tone, a universal echo that transcended language and geography. Others feared that the project had activated something external, something now tethered to our unconscious state like a parasite hiding in our circuitry. But a third theory, quieter, more dangerous, suggested something else entirely. That what Station 8 found wasn't an anomaly, it was a prison. That the 3 test subjects weren't victims of a failed experiment, but the locks, and that the sleep project had shattered something carefully contained. In a forgotten Cold War transcript buried in the cache, a conversation took place between 2 unnamed scientists following the closure of a related Soviet project. One line stood out. It was not meant to be contacted. It was meant to be isolated. The growing consensus within the hidden layers of the defense world was this. The phenomenon was no longer responding passively. It was learning. The voice patterns were becoming more coherent, the phrases less ambiguous. Over time, the signal had gained familiarity with human thought, adapting its tempo, mimicking known languages, accessing memories. It wasn't just echoing us, it was becoming us. In early 2021, a military satellite used for deep atmosphere research recorded an unauthorized burst transmission from an unregistered ground source located in eastern Nevada, near the presumed site of Station 8. The signal lasted only 12 seconds, but its spectral footprint showed embedded code matching the voice print of Subject Charlie. The content of the transmission was passed by linguists and audio engineers over several weeks. The decoded message, "We need not wake to speak." Immediately following the event, several members of the decoding team reported identical dreams, a sealed corridor, humming vibrations, and a heavy sensation in their limbs. One team member claimed to hear a countdown, ticking upward instead of downward. The final number, 44. One researcher theorized that it wasn't a countdown at all, but a count, a tally. of minds synchronized. Soon after, reports increased of people hearing their own names in static, not just during sleep, but while fully awake, in radio interference, in fan hums, in the oscillation of appliances. The instances were random, but always intimate, always personalized. The voices knew things, nicknames from childhood, forgotten lullabies, words in languages never learned. Across several psychiatric institutions, patients diagnosed with dissociative fugue entered unprompted trances and began writing in spiral. The content of the spirals, when mapped and rotated against acoustic frequency charts, aligned perfectly with the waveform of the Station 8 recordings. No explanation, no treatment. And then came the silences. Hospitals, military bases, data centers, places once humming with low-level electronic background noise, began reporting complete dropouts during specific time windows. 11 seconds of dead air. Equipment didn't record anything during these windows. Audio logs showed gaps, cameras dropped frames, light sensors froze. It was as though time itself held its breath. Each event occurred at 4:44 a.m. Each was followed by a brief return of power, and in some cases, reports from staff that they'd seen someone in the room just before the lights flicked back on. Always the same description: a person facing away, unmoving, humming, never turning around. At first, these moments were dismissed, but as they multiplied, and as incident reports began to use the same phrases, face turned, walls breathing, sound behind the wall, the thread could no longer be ignored. The signal, it seemed, no longer needed equipment to be heard. The final document in the cache was a brief, unsigned note. No letterhead, no agency identifier. Just a scanned page, faded and uneven. It read, "Echo continues. They have not stopped transmitting, but now they ask us things, and we are answering, even when we think we're asleep." There was no signature, only a timestamp. 4:44. The final piece of the puzzle did not arrive through documents, transmissions, or archives. It came in the form of absence, the sudden disappearance of the last known original data from Project Station 8. In late 2022, an internal audit of the DoD's long-term cold storage repositories revealed that Tape 3C, the final uncorrupted audio recording from the Granite Hills facility, was missing, not misplaced, not degraded. Gone. The physical tape, its duplicate reels, even its spectral fingerprint in the backup servers had been erased. And with it, the last clear recording of Subject Alpha's final EEG-linked vocalizations, the same sequence that had been secretly compared across sleep studies, audio anomalies, and unexplained transmissions for decades. The foundation, the heartbeat of the mystery, was no longer retrievable. But the echoes didn't stop. In fact, they intensified. By early 2023, researchers around the globe began experiencing what they termed non-local recall interference, sudden, unprovoked memories of locations they had never visited, dreams they never recorded, and phrases they never learned. In shared forums, patients from sleep clinics on opposite sides of the planet described the same place: a vast, echoing chamber carved into black stone, filled with still water that reflected no light. And in that water, voices moved, not across the surface, beneath it. When digital artists tried to render these visions based on descriptions, a strange phenomenon occurred. Files corrupted, layers bled into each other, audio channels embedded within image metadata. Some even claimed that their editing software began auto-generating names for the files: Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, even when disconnected from the internet. Then came the children. In scattered reports across rural North America and Eastern Europe, school-age children began sleep-talking in languages their families didn't speak. Old dialects, dead alphabets, rhythmic patterns unplaceable by linguists. Some were found sleepwalking in circles around their homes, muttering sequences that, when transcribed and slowed, matched known sequences of the signal. Most disturbing of all, they knew the names of the original test subjects, not full names, not identities, just the code names, spoken with clarity, with reverence, like remembering old friends. And across countless reports, those children would say the same thing when asked what the voices were saying. They're still dreaming. In parallel, engineers working on deep learning models for AI voice generation noticed a statistical spike in models generating non-requested speech during silence padding. Empty output fields, places where no words should exist, began to autofill with single phrases. When the raw outputs were reviewed, the most frequent insertion was a short question. Do you remember? No prompting, no input, and no pattern, save one. The models that produced the phrases had all been trained on public audio datasets containing fragments of the infamous deltadream.wav, the mysterious open-source file derived from the Station 8 signal thought long forgotten. Even machine learning, it seemed, had begun to listen. Then, late that same year, an amateur radio operator in Nevada uploaded a live feed of a bizarre recurring broadcast on an unused shortwave band. The signal lasted only 44 seconds each night, always at the same time, always on the same frequency. The operator, who went by the handle Echo Watcher, claimed the signal was audible only once you began falling asleep. He claimed he hadn't slept in 3 weeks. The night before his account went dark, he posted a short update, recorded in shaky handheld video. Behind him, the lights flickered. His voice trembled. I saw it. The hallway. The door at the end is open now. The hum is inside me. I think we were never supposed to hear it, but we did. And now, it wants to be heard. He ended the video by showing a blank wall in his basement. Except it wasn't blank. There was a faint impression, an outline, of a door that wasn't there the week before. The video was deleted by the platform within minutes. Not flagged, not taken down for violation. Deleted. Removed from all mirrors. All cached versions corrupted. A handful of users who had screen recorded it before removal reported hearing background whispers in their own playback. Not during the video. After. Through their headphones. From systems not connected to the internet. What began in 1965 as an experiment, a curiosity, a test of sleep thresholds in a windowless facility in the middle of nowhere, had become something else. A recursive engine of memory. A vibration passed between generations, across wires, minds, networks, and unconscious states. Not a frequency, a presence. And whether it began with the 3 test subjects or simply used them as conduits, one truth remained. It never stopped. It never shut down. It was patient. It waited for us to build a world loud enough to drown it out. And now, in the digital hum of a billion machines, the white noise between our devices, the silent gaps between REM cycles and power fluctuations, it has returned. There is no final page, no last entry. Only this lingering awareness. We open the door. We never closed it. And something is still on the other side, watching, listening, remembering, just like us.